Alangzo the Digi Juvia da Dunga Segi Tablam de la Danga Jugi Dunga Kadisungores and Sem Nyomo Birik de Latine Yungores and Digi Juvia dida Nyomo Birik de Sege and Digi Juvia and Digi Nyembo Tienche and the Nyembu Tienche Nyomo but Meva Sege and then to Digi Jugores. Dine Zada Zugeta. Dunga di nyomo biriti yu yungwe ni suchitawa shindo matongwa lo lokshe no chuyin pate inza dela tenenga zo nyomo paki dunga yungores da di nyembo ngwe ni suchitawa shindo topiki che rangshin mo chitawa shindo topiki lo di ngansu ki le keba ina dene ane nyomo pate ye lo nyomo biriti ki pa gagor meba sugores chesada ngwe ni suchitawa shindo topiki lo tela tene nga zo digi chuptuku ores di inza da nga zo ge che tamchi yungo rangshin ngui ni su gana sire sene di jeba cheche ngui ni su yungo di ham topi ki tsema gana chili ngui sungu ores di go nga zo jeba chene di da shuye di shiki orwa da nga zo delia.
Good evening. For all of us, we want to experience only happiness and be freed of pain and suffering. And the method to achieve a state of lasting, stable happiness is through the eradication of our afflictions, because it's afflictions that cause us to suffer now and to create causes for further suffering. And the way one eradicates the afflictions is through applying the appropriate antidote. And through continuously, over a sustained period, applying antidotes skillfully, one eradicates the afflictions completely and achieves a state of lasting, stable happiness. The reason that we are tormented by afflicted minds, that they arise almost continuously, is because we do not understand reality. So it's because we do not understand reality that we misperceive how things exist, that we don't understand the actual situation. Our afflictions arise and we suffer. So therefore it's through coming to understand reality that we can achieve happiness. And it is for this reason that we're looking at this topic here.
Jiglia, Kari Nugu, Kari Pengudus, Ko Penu, Kari Yungu, Jeba Chedu, Dutenki Pachi, Chichi, the Kabla, and then the Penangazuki, Tsavi, Rashin, Dutenchuina, Delia, and the Mavasu, Nugu, Nugus, and Javi, Rachaki, Dute, Diki Nugorwa, Tsavi, Rasha, Duten Yorwa, Tsawa, Chesa Duten Delia, Kari Nugos, and Javi, Dute, Zixiorwa, Jangmi, Duten Yorwa, Duten Mambu Yorwa. Chizan Sawu, you can make about the Sawu Yorwa, Dela Dutin Sawu Yorwa, Dela Chu Chakwacha Dutin Dangmorwa, Chizan Dutin Dangmodigi, Savi Dutin Delia Nugorwa, Di Mavasu Tugorwa, Chizada, Dineza, Di Nashi, Mahaji, Dutin, Centric Bicheva Chedukala, and then Paya Riti, Savi Rigli, Paya Kariosan, Shinda, Desuya Pata, and I met. Number Luban made a Hawa Cherugoro, Dutendile Pingu di Dutendiki, Chik Pingoro, and Dinajin Jeba Cheche, and Sendi Pigi Jeba Chede, Duten Pembe, Yum the George and Yarket Diada, and Duten maybe Negi Rikti, Mogoya Rikti, Dele, Nubigi, Dutendiki, Dangje, Meva Sueti. Then as one go man capsa Dirwada, Nazule, Chicken Nasa said Dutent, Neg, Dutele, the one go man get cup party. Japche Deniki Pa, Tushin, the Toshtangoro, meant a dinashin, Jigoro. Dinashin, the Dang of the same delia, same dele Jebach and Nazul, Yomokia, Gangatia, Rashin Nigala Gangakia, same de Ganesh to Ditabo Mosung. The Mosung Balatine, the same delia, Nukan, same Ganechiki, Nugu to Sibiki, Jebachedu, the same year, Chur Ganeshina, Rashin, we knew Niluchidawash and Dobu, Lodigi, Nugu or Wada, the Nugu Banza, that Denigi Topu Lodida, Nugu the Denig Lodi Yanga to Comje Yarget Combe Church Tadu, then Nyomo Berik, ane rik sem diki pa shuk chung ma chung rukorwa dus jene nga zuki nguye nesu ki pa sem nyombe rikla sem kariki nyugudu sede di nyugen dila nyembo sikorwa da nga zu chuzik jena nyomo brikla nguye nyembo ten sikorwa da ni chuzik ma sheba na nyugen sikorwa da jizan diniki nyugen rikdi pa shuk char tang yudu da nga zu moga nyomo brikdu shuk rangshin yu chung rukorwa dutenda jikbarwa da
Researchers who are wanting to create something, they will investigate it, particularly if we take an illustration from a chemistry lab. They will understand that by mixing various chemicals together, a wanted or an unwanted result may follow. And they'll understand if they're wanting to achieve a particular chemical compound, then they need to mix precise quantities of particular chemicals to achieve that compound. And perhaps they need to be very careful because they will know that if they get it a bit wrong, a very different result may follow. And this is the case even outside of the chemistry lab too. If we want boiled water, we know we need a lot more heat. Or if we want water that's just warm, we need less heat. And if it's too hot, we add some cold water and then it gets to the right temperature. So what we're seeing here is that by bringing certain causes together, a particular result comes. And likewise, the world has been suffering under the pandemic for a year and a half now. And the vaccines were developed through a lot of effort and research over the period of last year. And there a lot of research went into what is what is the structure of the virus? What do we know about this kind of virus? What we know from our knowledge can prevent this virus from harming us, etc. And from all this knowledge and research, vaccines were developed. So here what we're seeing is just like a vaccine can be applied to prevent the infection and the getting particularly ill, so too, through looking at our minds, we can recognize which minds are very far from where we want to be. So just like a severe illness is far from where we want to be on the physical level, so too, when our mind is very disturbed, we're far from where we want to be. So here we can investigate what is present in our mind now. So therefore we can recognize that we are disturbed. What are the external causes? What are the various internal causes? In this way we can we can see for ourselves not only when our mind is particularly afflicted, but why it is so. And as we gather more knowledge and then apply that knowledge through investigation, we will come to see that right at the root of our afflicted, disturbing minds is a misapprehension of reality, of not understanding how particular situations exist or individuals and so forth exist. It's our misapprehension of reality that leads to the arisal of the afflictions that disturb our minds so. What we need is to develop an understanding that is concordant with reality. So if our way of engaging in the world, our way of abiding, is in accord with reality, afflictions will not arise. Our mind will be in accordance with reality, be peaceful, loving, and wise.
다 되자 콘조 나자 세다 디니기 직디 하나들이야 다 라신이가 동화 영역의 규디 다디 콘조디기 임바데 가서 세보를 하고 두고로 소소 콘로선은 소소야 마기바셔 샤야 마기바셔 디원게 샤냐 강한테야데 용고로 지산 되자 콘조라서 봐 디소 다 디소야 간치리 용고를 세디다 또 지능아 저기 교회의 규디 가르칠 용고를라데 다zen marikba se tenzin se atele rashin tuba zimbe zimba se on dele tene kigore je sada di gane chi re lamna ta jan dedan delya yu gane na we ne nga su nang yu kabla gang la ya ma tyo rang ngwe de shen chi la ma tyo ba rangwen drubachi lole nangores jinawa di nangsu di tempa druba na se rangshin druba na su dire denis nawa na ji yore sam jimbi lo di da rangshin druba jimbi jimba la gore din tempa druba din sin la gore sidan di jimbi lo di da nga zu nyomo ji yu zo de dire sa wi ju de dire sa cha zu ge da sem rangshin ni ga la kanga dunga yo ya ki yu za wa de dire sa de nga zu mo tre di ji go ba da.
Through the teachings we've heard and our observation that comes from applying those teachings, we've recognized that afflictions such as attachment, anger, and pride cause us to suffering. And not only do they cause us to suffer, but through their expression, they bring suffering to others. Of all the afflictions, anger is the one that is most clearly harmful. When our mind is angry, even only slightly, we are disturbed. And if we are particularly angry, our pain is deep. When we express this to others, we know the harm that comes to our relationships with others. So therefore we have experience of the immediate harm that the afflictions bring to ourselves and to others. And we also have an understanding of the harm that it brings over a longer term, such as in this life. And we have an understanding of the karmic consequences that follow from the afflictions too. And afflictions such as anger, they all have the same root cause. Ignorance, and not any ignorance. The ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping. And what is that? It's all phenomena appear to consciousness as being self-existent or existent by way of their own nature or essence. And then a consciousness grasps at them as being true. In other words, the way that it appears, being the way that it exists in reality, the appearance is true. And this is a consciousness of true grasping. And if the object happens to be the self, that same consciousness is now just called self-grasping. And because the phenomenon does not exist in the way that it appears, it is not true, that consciousness is not in accordance with reality, and therefore is an ignorance. And every phenomenon, the self, objects of thought, thoughts themselves, and all external phenomena, they appear to consciousness as being truly existent. And it's the grasping at true existence that is the root cause of all our suffering.
Dini gita yu rangi kalai mato rangi dhuba nang di nawa na shin zimbi lo di da and digi dini ki lo denzin di marik bari ko yu yungui nisu jidawa shin tongyo ma res ma tongwa de dangui nisu di ma tongwa res ko lo lokshe cha de re jerwa and yu koran yu koran ngui nisu de kan shi hore labdu tang du chi shimju chi ne na ngui nisu di yu koran ge ngui nisu di ye kar re labna 강라 예마도 랑원이 주바디게 똥바레스 랑원이 강라 예마도 랑원이 주바디게 똥바레스 아니 똥바인자 랑원이 주비 똥바인자 아니 가레스는 시한라 뛰는 주바지레스 시한라 뛰는 주바지마도 시한라 마되버 주바지 요마레스 지상 최간에 지나 고용오니수디 시한라 젠지를 뛰제 파뢰 따발에 되는 주고레스 용고레스 지상 시한라 뛰는 뢰 따바되는 주바인자 강라이마도 랑원의 주베 똥바디 최탐지 호롱주 무인이 수도 되는 시리에서야지.
Every phenomenon, every object of thought that we engage with this ignorance of self-grasping, or the ignorance of true grasping. So therefore we misapprehend every object that appears to us. And the consequences of that is something really to think about. So what it means is every object of thought appears to us in a way that is discordant with how it exists in reality. And then a consciousness grasps at that appearance as being how the object actually exists. So it's a consciousness that believes that the appearance is true in accordance with reality. And it grasps at it as existing in this way. But phenomena do not. And therefore that consciousness is an ignorance, a wrong consciousness. So how is it then, or how do phenomena exist in reality? Actually, they exist in a way that is quite different from how they appear, in that phenomena appear to be independent, self-existent, existing by way of their own essence. But they are empty of existing in that way. They are empty of existing by way of their own characteristics or nature or essence. So rather than being independent or independently established, independently existent, which is how they appear, phenomena are empty of existing in this way. How do they exist? As mutually dependent, or to express that differently, dependent on other, such as causes, parts, and in particular, imputation by mind.
다 최 탐지게 라신디 강라에 마되 바랑문을 주비 동바 인자 내내게 최 간데시나 강라에 마되 바랑문을 주비 동바 도베 로디 최 영어인지 수치다와신 통베 로디 로디 디차고라 동바에 최 라신인 주비 동바 도베 로디 나라 동바이 도베 로시고와 디 내내게 로디다 최기 니수 뭐 라신 지다와신도 하고 하도 왜네 하고 간 로디 디차되어와다.
The consciousness that recognizes that whatever object is being meditated on, or one could express it as all phenomena, are empty of being established by way of their own essence, that consciousness that is realizing emptiness is in accordance with reality. This is a consciousness that is realizing how phenomena actually abide or actually exist.
나 내게 최 탐제 라신 주비 동바디 동바이 도베 로디 동바이 하고 로디다 최경 원인이 수시다신 하고 로 참아되지. 엔디 나신 최 탐제 라신 주비 동바레 동바인자 안에 강라에 현실을 되네 파 다바즈니 여바디 나 여바 하고 로디 나 최경 원인이 수다하고 로직 참아지 로직 디차고를 디니디다 원인이 수취 간에시나 디 원인이 수 라신 원인이 수 하고 건 로디 디차고로와 네 참아체고로와.
Moreover, this consciousness that realizes that phenomena are empty of inherent existence, or to express that differently, the consciousness that realizes phenomena are empty of existing by way of their own nature, this is a valid cognizer. Moreover, one should also come to recognize that phenomena, the way they do exist, is as a dependent arising. In particular, dependency on imputation by mind. All phenomena exist as merely as an imputation by mind. And the consciousness that realizes dependent arising, this too is a valid cognizer.
안디네 인자 당하즈길에 계획이 딜로니데 안즈길에 계획고로 와당아서 최탐 간이시네 강라에 모두 랑문이 주변 동바 사고 근 체마딩 로딩 안즈길에 계획고로 와 강라에 모두 랑문이 주변 동바 이내야 민장파 지게 현실에 되네 파뢰 파 다바증이 민장 다约점도 여봐서 뢰 다바증 여봐 니 하고고라 제가 딜로니데 안즈길에 계획고래 딩이디 계쟁아주 야 공부가제 슉처처처 다베네 되는 용모바디마 슉충충저 방투고라 되네자 당하주기 딩런이딩 아주를 되길라 계고고다 뭐취이니수 뭐이니수 지다와신도 토별론이디 디레 딩아주길라 계고고다.
So here you have in a nutshell what the two valid cognizers that we all need to cultivate within ourselves. The first being the realization that all phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own essence. And secondly, that the valid cognizer that realizes how all phenomena exist, which is as dependent arisings, in particular, dependence on imputation by mind. And as one receives further teachings, reads texts, and meditates on this repeatedly over a sustained period, one strengthens one's familiarity with these two consciousnesses, the understanding of emptiness and the understanding of dependence arising. And as these two understandings develop, our afflictions weaken. And eventually, we'll come to realize dependence arising and emptiness with valid cognizers, weakening our afflictions ever further. And continuing in this process over a sustained period, eventually we'll be able to completely eradicate our afflicted minds.
심주진의 제바라제 삼라망보다 디진의 디용그레 디진 디용그레스베는 두테의 제바제나 천리바디게 디진의 디용도 바제바지 담에 타줄이야 안 디진은 디역보용도 세지 타체지 용로 인디나진 아주네 제바제제 어디진의 디용도와 규테네 jel레데 제부딘지네 규직 깨나 규질레드네 깨고레베 규메바질 깨고가르 세지 깨나 규레드네 깨고레 귤레티네 깨와는 유간스틸레티 깨고라 간스틸레기 말해서 두치데 심주시에도 가상게 냐가서 냐마시반 달레 마예 셸레미 니레메 규메메 모보카나 깨와나며 여마예 세도 깨나 안에직 두체바지데 가시게 달레 깨와레 세다 가시게 제바지는 가시게 셸레 깨와레 세다 가시게 다다신 니가레 기그레 세다 가시게 규메발레 기그레 세다 데네게 두치 심주치 제바제도 그런 저기 타메 타주를 봐 지에도 그 타주시다 림바 망보실래요와 데니길래도 안 델야 안 텐주비기 달레게 세야디 결혼 삼단에 데네데네 있나 견데네데 용구리 세야다 샬레게 와네 견데네데 랑거리 다 니가레게 와르람나 견데네데 용구리스 유메발레게라네 견데네데 용구리스 두치네 심주치 바 리버든 데니게 제바지 리버든 안 타메 타주라 가르시네 애니께서 다다 셴다 라신 유튜브에 다다 셴 규강래 마디와 코 셴질 되는 주고래 세시고로 받아 땡규베디세야 돼. 제가 라다데 달레게 셴레게세 라신 유튜브에 다다 셴레게와 기시고로 받아 라신 유튜브지라. 제가 라신 유튜브 다다 셴레게와 이나 견데네데 용구래. 제가 라신 유튜브네 되는 용구래. 제가 라신 유튜브 세데 킬링교 말에 라신 유튜브 세 삼르ክን데 따교 말에 라신 유튜브 세데 요 말에 세지 파텐유베다 방 모체 지기도 와 리바 제바체데 심죽체체 도스 송고로와
These two consciousnesses that we need to cultivate, that which understands mutual dependency and that which understands emptiness, we need to cultivate, and eventually giving rise to a clarity of realization, or a strength of realization perhaps, that is a valid cognizer. To do so takes repeated and sustained effort, repeated and sustained analysis to investigate how phenomena appear, and then seeking them out to see if they exist in the way that they appear. And then following that, seeing that they do not exist in the way they appear, investigate how do they exist, and investigate mutual dependency. So this process we can liken to scientists and engineers in that all that's being created in our world, whether from if we look at technology or medicine or other forms of science, we can see it hasn't come about spontaneously, but in dependence on the accumulation of a vast number of causes, such as the accumulation of knowledge from over generations, and many other causes required to develop something. So what are the causes then that are required to bring about a result? And how do those causes exist? How does the result exist? And the production of phenomena, how does that come about? And last week we looked at production, because those who assert inherent existence, that phenomena exist inherently, will also assert a form of inherent production. And we looked at the refutation of inherent production in terms of if phenomena were inherently produced from themselves, from both self or other, or causelessly. So we looked at that last time.
Kissing the Dalai, yes, Da said, Jida Numbun, Manzo Da love the Gansa Kukure, Gansa, Da love the Ga Da Sanga, said the Gansa Chipa to Nachibare, Iki Chipa to Da said. That the captain in Jimmy Gansa Kukoma, Da said, Rana Sosa Rang said, Ben Rana to the Pen Pumba and Pumba Rangi said, and Chesan Chek and Nation, Da said, Dine, Randa, Dani Chipi, Rashin droop to hen. Rashin Dubigi, Dani Chicken can Kuchile Kevaina, Nikur, such a dicky mares or Dale Mainsid, and that the Dale King Maresidua, Rang Dale King Maresid, Jebuji Kigore, in a Jebudi, and the Jebose Gule Kigore, Jebudi Gule Kevare, and Gudi Jebu Kigores, and Makevading was the tiny Kigor, in a Gudi Jebudi Gudile Kigore, and then Guganichile Kigre Lamna. Dalai Kigri says Lahanchi Yorwa. Chisan to thank you be Dalai Kig Mare love the Garka Gors and Dalai Kimasan, good devoted and Guni, Dain Chip, Mochi, Rashin to be Gucci King Mare, Laura. Rashin to be Dain Chip, Gucci King Mares. Rashin to be Dain Chip in Gucci King Mares, Mochi in Gucci King Mares order. Chesan Ganjele Jebu di Gudili Gigorwa, Gudili Gigor de Jebu than Guniga Rashin more the Rashin droop to him Gucci King Mares or Rashin droop to Guli King Mares. That Danichi Guli Gigri said, the handy Chiruba Dugore, Chiruba Karasungorson. Yudan Jibuni Rashin Chigres or Konyo Chigbares, Ben Sergi Subi Bumbadina, Suegi Guser Tedan, Suesi Bumbani, Namjur Sobdak Haramado, Danda Rashin Serin, but Chigbaras or Chesan Jebu the Gudile Gudan Jibuni Rashin Chigbares Konye, Chesan Koni Napa Haramado, Rashin Chigbarella. That Rashin Chigbarala, that thank you be going to Rashin Chigbares, Rashin Chigbares, Rashin did Temper Trubas, Chakuran killing Gores, she's not Temper Trubi Rashin Chile Kiawa, Elam, Chicken Mares, because the Temper Trubi Rashin Kiawan, Chiba Inza, Gu pick up and Jebu the Yoteres. She's not Jebu Yosana, Koki, Kiela to Gudela in the Jebu, Yama Meva, Sardo Kiva Labore, she's not Kudikas on the Jebu the Yodeven, Sardo Kiva, Rela, Mares, Kira, Dilab the Chicken Mares, Dilab Yo Mares or that.
Looking at, so if we look at the text and the diamond slivers, refutation of inherently existent production from the perspective of the cause. So what we looked at last week. So if we look at what in our text is the second point, it says, if results were produced from themselves. So the word here is literally self. So Kendler said, look, that the word that is used is self doesn't mean the I, although it is the same word, but to say from themself or itself is the meaning. So what we have here is correct. So what does this mean? Well, certain groups of non-Buddhists believe that production comes from itself. So so they're saying that from a cause a result comes. So this sounds to perhaps to make some sense, because Buddhists certainly do also assert that a cause comes from an effect. But what these particular non-Buddhists are asserting.
Sorry, an effect comes from a cause or cause?
An effect comes from a cause, sorry. An effect comes from a cause. So certainly Buddhists would say this too. But what the non-Buddhists are saying is that the cause and the effect are of the same nature or the same essence. In particular, that their essence is identically one. There is no difference in essence or in nature between the cause and the effect. So the cause and effect are of the identical essence or are one and the same. So this is the assertion. And then Prasangika refute this, saying that cannot be the case. If the cause and the effect were of an essence that is one and the same, there would be no need for production, because the result would be existent at the time of the cause.
지산 단위 지비게 유 랑신이 주비 단위 지비 규지를 깨와를 랍나 디네 랑신이 주비 유랍나 아니 그 유어균에 줘야 매되겐 코로나 당보 간수나 다가라 진내가 진내 구호래 세걸 와다 지산 내고 봐는 그 유어 줘야면은 유디 유어 모르는 지부게 코로나 용말 와다 지산 제부게디 제부 코로나 게디 유디 유어 친제 니 유어 줘발래 때네 제부디 연구하러 왔어 지산 제부게디 귤라파 땡지 유디 유어 친발래 때네 아니 제부디 기고도 데네 기고요 반상 아니 제부게디 귤레 떼고도 귤레 떼고도아 귤레 떼바마세 유디 유어 줘발래 떼고도아 결혼 삼다지는 유디 라신 주발래 랍디 라신 주발이나 강라에 떼바면 유어균을 줘야명에 차로 제부디야 아니 강라에 떼면 매바 당번에 여여바 차기로 제가 떼룹 책임이 도와서 제가 남중앙에서 미기 하고 해야 다 라바라바 섬드는 아주 신바디기 또도 누구지도 사본 마답 사본 유어 줘야 출루 아니 사나루 출루디 아니 당보 말루디 감보 감자로와 디야 보고 첨부차 보고 첨부 섭섭차 되는 누구지기도 와 제가 제부 유디 유화 신제 아니 누구디 기기도 와 제가 누구 코로나 게해디 유디를 떼고도 와 유디 유어 줘발로 떼고도 와 결혼 삼단다 제가 라신 주바르는 떼매 말이스 그래서 유어 줘야 매 말이스 당보 가제나 다가라 착보치나 착보치 차도 그래 유어 줘야 매 제가 되는 제변은 결혼 삼단다 제변은 누구 아주 제부디 귤에 깨와를 랍네 라페 깨와 매바 차로 그래 깨와를 라면 네 매바 차로 그래 그래서 네 유어 죽음도 와스 제가 마도바는 네 다가라 제부디 귤에 떼니 끼게 돼야 돼 시야요 말이스 제가 깨와디 결혼 케링고래 유어 균을 두고 말하면 뒤에 난갈 차게 돼서 난갈 가와 차게 돼서 결혼 유규라 좋아요 말에 제가 당보 가능신 나가라 레랍나 유어 줘야면 될든 제부기야요 말에서 제가 유어 줘요 말에 라야 결혼 삼단아 지 삼단도 제부디 규제를 끼기를 라기도 뒤에 난갈에서 제가 뒤 난갈 차게도 와서는 코로나를 라주치고로 와자 달에만 세디 계시거든. 달이야. 다디디 저위치 달에만 예전에미서 달이게 와서 디기 시거든.
Here, Prasangika say, if a cause existed by way of its own essence, or was inherently existent, like you say, you non-Buddhists say, that cause would never change. Because it exists by way of its own essence, it could not change. And not being if a cause could not change, how could ever a result follow? A seed could never sprout, because a seed that was inherently existent, that existed by way of its own nature, that nature would have to be unchanging. The meaning of inherent existence, or true existence, is that something is unchanging and independent. Causes, for example, would not impact it. So a cause could never transform or ripen into a result. So a result comes about in dependence on a cause. And that cause cannot be inherently existent, as you assert, because that cause could never become, or lead to a result. For a seed to sprout, it needs to be impacted by various conditions. For example, it needs warmth, it needs moisture. And if the conditions are suitable, appropriate, that seed will ripen into the sprout. But if that seed existed in the way that you say it does, which is by way of its own nature, it could not change. And therefore, because it exists by way of its own nature, and meaning it's independent, conditions such as moisture and heat would have no impact on it. And therefore, it could not ripen. If what you say, you non-Buddhists say, is true, is correct, production would be impossible, in fact, production would be contrary to what you are saying.
다 현래 대지대 달래 기와 마인 세드파 랍서드 술러워선 치료 장전바 공들래고 다 현래 기와 민세디 다 현래 기와 수익행리거선 당은 치료배 길려서 낭바 라주바다 제라마다 tenju바 마인바 신방을 낭바 차상기 현래 기와래서 길린 거래 제자다 현래 기와래서 다 건조게 현래 기와래서 다 가르러버서는 베네 유 라신이 주비게 제부 딜레 현규 라신이 주비 규치를 기고래라 ben방도 부구로 계획나 부구 유디 아마디 부구 딜레 현로와 부구 딜레 현레 데 현레데 델라 계와 점지 라신 현레 계와 시고 말다 현레 계와 라고 말 다 가르스는 부구데 아마디레 부구 유디 아마레 제산 유 아마디 부구 딜레 현레 이나 데니게 아마디 유디 라신이 주비 규치래서 라신이 주비 규시래서 라신이 주 부구딜리 부구디 유 규데 아마디 셴 부구딜레 셴비 유 제부딜레 셴비 유 라신이 주바지래서 어제다 규디 데위기 규디 제부딜레 셴로와 제부딜레 셴 라신이 주비게 셴지래서 제가 데니게 데니지리 기고래서 제가 텐주 비게데 디키와 있는 지금 말해서 다디 셴레 키와 요 말해서도 제가 제보 딜레 셴유 라신 유튜브 규치레 기기레 랍나 디지기 말해서 디 랍사 찍바레 라신 유튜브 규이나 규와 규네 되면 당보 가르치나 다가라 찍디니시 요고 그래서 제가 고 다가라 여바이나 고 규와 줘야 매바선 규디게 제부 깨야디 규와 줘니 떼고라 제가 제보데 규를 떼고 말해서 가선 제우 군디 제우 차그말 제가 셴라 뛰네 규셴 랑신 주비디 규딜레 깨와 깨네 지금 말해서 가르스네 디깨와는 대신나 주규엔 찍바래다 규디 규와 마도바체 제부디 깨야요 말해서 기기 말해서 제가 제부디 규를 땜바 차그 말해서 제가 결혼기 제부디 규딜레 뛰네 깨와래 라고도 저 진네 결혼 깨와래 라고도 깨와래 라고도 양 저진네 규디 랑신 주바래 라고도 와서 제가 유어균을 줘야 명에 relag도 왔어. 유어 줘야 되면은 유디 제부 유어만 제부 맞게 맞나? 제부된 균이보다 제가 가야면도 왔어. 제가 제부의 규례를 떼내기 라는 지금도 왔어. 제가 가와 차기도 왔어. 랍사 직바레데 랍사 가가로 와. 대시 랍사 치료 발라. 다디딩 저기 낭바데 대술라 셴리게 왔어. don다 직바레고 셴 라신 주바 짱짱샤고로 다라나 라신 주바 규디 셴람나 라신 주바 라신 주비 규치레 깨와나 라신 주비 규셴이나 뒤규와 줘야 말데 마 규와 줘야면 델레티네 제부기 말에 디기면은 결혼을 제부기를 라기도 어디니 가와 차게 돼서 랍사 직바레
We're looking at the quotation from Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. So at the bottom of this section, underneath the fourth point. So we've looked at the first, neither from itself, and now we're looking at the second, nor from another. So neither from itself was refuting the view of non-Buddhists, and now nor from another is to refute the view of Buddhists. So just to say as an aside, this verse is a summary of these 4 points that are above. So here Prasangika are debating with other Buddhists, whereas with the first point they were debating with non-Buddhists. But the debate itself is the same as before. The illustration that is given is that a child is born from a mother, and it's accepted that a child is other to the mother. They're not the same, but are other. The cause of the child is the mother. But non-Prasangika Buddhists state that cause, the mother, is inherently existent. And so whilst they say the result is other to the cause, they are asserting that the cause exists by way of its own nature, its own essence. And Prasangika say, if that is the case, there's the same consequence as we've just presented to the non-Buddhists, which is that if the cause existed inherently, That means it's independent. It couldn't be impacted on by anything else, such as other causes, and could not change. A child could not be produced from a mother. So it's the same argument as before, that if a cause is inherently existent, it cannot change. Its nature, its essence is unchanging and independent, and therefore it couldn't lead to a result, whereas a result is dependent on a cause. But if that cause is inherently existent, no result can follow from it.
nyugu khorong le shen pigi sabon dili kya wara, sabon di nyugu dili shen rwa. Chisa nyugu di sabon dili shen pi, nyugu dili shen pi gyuli kya wares. Pugu di ki rang le shen pi ama li gyuli kya wares. Ina shen le kya ware la kyo mar. Shen le kya se di rang shin yu dhubi kyu shen chi la, so go khore. Mato yang chik dili shen le kya min si ten yu pi kyo oda nyugu di ki shen le kya mar sa nyugu khorong le shen pi gyuli kya warwa di ten yu pi ki di samda di norsha samda dhingi rwa di mare. Tenju bigi nyugu deke rangi shenle rangle shenpi gyuli keware wasin keware. Pugu deke rangle shenpi gyuli keware kasa amale keware, amale rangle shen res. Sida nyugu deke rangle shenpi gyuli keware kasa rangle shen sabonde keware, sabonde nyugu dele shen res. Sida rangle shenpa tsam gyuli chile kewa tsamla shenle kewa lago mar. Shenle kewa sayadi rangle shenpi nyugu rangshi gyu rangshi yu druptike gyu chila. Dene kena shenle kyewa ase orda. Di kyewa yomar, shenle kyewa yomar ase di rangle shenpa tsam yu gyuchile kyewa yomar di sungu omare. Da karas shenle kyewa mewa ase donda karar lana rangle shenpi yu gyu rangshin yu drupa chile kyewa yomar ase. Rangle shenpi yu gyu, pene nyugu di rangle shenpi yu gyu sabon li kyewa re de sabon rangshin yu drupa chile kyewa omar ase. Jesan sabon rangshin yu drupa ina sabon gyuwa dhruwa yomar ase. Sawa gyuwa dhruwa mena nyugu kyewa yomar ase. Ondu sungu orda. Dadidi dikagu na dikagu or dikaran shi dadingi di janda chasan shigo mar de karkago sun gyule kyewa de shenle kyewa kaya ke shigo ro. Chizda de dadi shenle kyewa se duwa shenle kyewa se di danda de lo ko he de la nyu dile shen sabon de ki duwa. Chizna denis kyewa dile shenle kyewa lagi ribes ne dil lagu o mareje di kyewa tenyu ba ya khelingo reje nyu khorang kye di rang le gyu shen sabon chile kyewa tenju be khilingo res di shen le kyewa di samye shen le kyewa lagyo ma res da shen le kyewa se de kan chi lagyo re labna rang le shen gyu rang shi yu ba chile kyewa de la shen le kyewa lagyo res den de kyewa yo ma re je re tenju be pha shen le kyewa kaya di rang le shen rang shi yu be gyu chi la den de kyewa yo ma res den de chi la me ba chi le shen le kyewa me ba se borde.
Here it's important to understand the distinction that Prasangika is making, because Buddhists do all accept production from mother. The child as I mentioned last week, the word for production can also be birth. So to say the child is produced from the mother sounds a bit strange, but it's the same word. So a child is born from the mother, the child is the result, the cause is the mother, and these two are other. And as is the sprout, which is produced or grown, or grows, it's the same word, grow, born, and production. So a sprout is grows from a seed, and the seed and the sprout are other. All Buddhists accept this. The discussion, though, is whether the cause exists inherently or not. That's what Prasangika do not accept. Prasangikas say to non-Prasangika Buddhists, you are mistaken to assert that cause exists by way of its own nature. So therefore, we don't accept what you mean by production from other. We accept production from other, but not as you mean it. Because you mean it that the cause is inherently existent. When it's not, it cannot be inherently existent. If it were inherently existent, it would therefore be unchanging and independent. And if it was unchanging, how could a result follow? And if it were independent, no conditions could impact on it, for example. So therefore, whilst we all Buddhists accept production from other, us as Prasangikas do not accept your understanding, non-Prasangikas, of production from other, because causes are not inherently existent.
Gabriel Makiwa, Chagirua, Benenga, Shanda Lumbani, Yargal Paki, Gunga, Nimshi Tangoli, extent Tangol Makiada, Yang Saji Kashelia, Yuki, Saji Kashel bed, no Lagalia, Yuki Marwa, Kashili Kigre, Kashi Marwa. Next, Tundo Hashi, such a Tovi Lake, Savi Makiwada, Gabriel Savi Lake, Janvi, such Jansan Makiwa in Yoruba. In that day, Kiawan Namia Yomare said, Ranshin you tribute Guliki said, Denigi, Gabriel Kiwa Yobana, Gabriel Kiwa Mebasa, Unioma, Kedina Kiayoma, that's what Namia Kiayoma said. Siktamadi.
The verse then continues, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both. So this is then easy to refute, in that nor from both means neither from itself nor from another. So the same reasons that have already been presented are equally relevant here. If something can't be produced from itself or from another, it can't be produced then therefore from both of them. And then continues, nor causelessly does anything whatsoever arise anywhere ever. This then is referring to causeless production. If production or birth or arisal was causeless, then anything could result from anything. For example, crops could grow at any time of year. They would require no particular conditions. They would require no particular seeds. Anything could happen because cause and result wouldn't exist. There would be no relationship between a cause and result.
And you may be like you are like when the children young me by say, like, or to the Chitang to Yoma rescue, you may be like you are a cigar. Chitan that comes to get big at a course and Mapcha said the bear, Chitsonoya, was you indicate Yoma or Ranshin, Yawares. The Sud G or Digan Sujama, the remote getting to in the Digan Sujama or Ranshin, Yawares. And then Jiggy Shinglia, Therma Yoruba, Therma, nobody girl. There's a suggestion here, Ranshin Yawares. Just not called Ranshin Yawares. The Niki Koshimjuchi, the Corancer, Ranshin Yawares, Chizan Guyo Maretisulia, Chizan Gumebal Yawares, she got it.
Causeless production is also asserted by some non-Buddhists, and they give illustrations which they believe prove causeless production. So they'll say, take, for example, the beautiful patterns on the feathers of a peacock. Who or what created this? This has no cause. Likewise, the particular sharpness of a thorn. Who or what created that? These have come about without cause. So these are the illustrations that the non-Buddhists who assert causeless production present.
And then 지산다 유메발의 기기네 되네 저기 제텔이야 안다 되네 되게 망고라 시간서 된도 답고 사번 마주 오면도 와스 지사 사번 메나이 된도 기열 지사 된도야 된도 기엘이야 사번 답고 면도 와서야다 안데네기 저기 다무이 니수 통되게 망보여 와든지 시네 유메발의 기엘은 균데데 용고래 사자 니 유메발의 기는 기디네 기와 기디나 기와 가시 yar가 기 가시 군갈 마기와 아니 베네 디용구도 와 제사 디네자 규메발 기와네 기디나 아니 기디나 기와 용구로 와서래
Causeless production from our own experience we know makes no sense. We observe cause and effect. If causeless production were correct, were in accordance with reality, food would just appear. There'd be no need for farmers to do anything. No need to plant seeds, no need to tend to a field. The plants would just come, and they'd come at any time of year. Who knows when, maybe all the time. But we know from our own experience that production cannot be causeless.
다시 송바다로다 다된마 어디 싸와들에 제자다 된마 가상한가 저기 제부디 기고레스 제부 줄이 기고레 시고로 디나신 아주 유 제부 기고레 상황저 지나 용달이 직진나야 제부디 줄이 기와 줄이 기고레스야다 유디기 제부디 기기레스야다 아주 디시야 줘봐 디네자 기생님마 디체 다된마 유 제부 기에서 디네 레고레스 제자 다유 제부 기에 제 작장 따나 계시 제부 오니기原来니 줍줍아식 지들 서도 깨워라 태대 규 서도 지 미구베 소세.
The diamond slivers section this concludes the first part, where if we look at the first sentence, we've now looked at that a result is produced from causes. Now we come to the second section and we look at the first sentence here, that causes do produce results. Reading from the text. Although it is widely known that causes do produce results, let us analyze this. If the produced result inherently existed, how could it be feasible for what already exists to be produced newly? For causes are not needed to create it anew.
나디네스도 규 제부기리에서 지금 저 레고레스 디네 다 딱지 제나 나도 제바 있나 따나 계지 제부디에서 다 계기 제부디 원이 교연아서 라신 주도바 임바 있나 원이 교연아서 라신 주바시 있나 제부디 라신 주바 있나 디네 줍주바시에서 고기에 봐도 줍차레스 제가 줍차완장 줍주바시 줍차바디 아니 사도 계와르 테디 지들 사도 계와르 간스 냐마 메바지 사도 계와르 라고레스 제산디 테기 말레스 가스 유 사도 계 미고비치스 유 사도 계 오미노 코코 라신 주바이나 코계 사레스 코 줍주바치레 줍차완자 대시 메바지 사도 계 라나 지금도 와서다.
Look at the first bullet point. If the produced result inherently existed, how could it be feasible for what already exists to be produced newly? So here, for those who believe that a result exists by way of its own essence, then that result would already exist. So there would be, how could it be feasible for it to be produced? How could it be feasible for a result to come about if that result itself exists by way of its own essence? Because existing by way of its own essence or inherently existent means it's unchanging, so it already would be present, and it is independent. It's not impacted by anything. So therefore, an inherently existent result could not be newly produced. It would already exist.
다데네 지르규 뒤소 마게바 마주바식 규 서도 계괴나 세도 지당한테 계발라도 뉴고디 규게 제부 기기리 라면도 gyudusu makebache rwa makebache tene ane makebaza machuba mebarwa mebache tene gyudigi tele tene sardu keworwa sardu kewachela tene chiri keworwa saro kekwenang tene chiri kewase tene chikogorwa se wada.
The second bullet point then starts. In general, causes are required to newly create that which has not been produced or not been created yet. So this is quite clear, that causes are required to produce something anew.
Ta majeba ngoni ye dena teme dan kebra mebe gyu chuptu chidar yes. Chidu chisandang azu gyudigi debu kigre labdu gyu dusu debu de mebache dene shine debu gyudela dene debu sardu kegorwa sardu kegorwa da gyu dusu debu de me majeba inzang majeba di rāshīng chūpa yīmbā yīnā sāwa mā kēpa ngōnyi kī tēnā sēdō ngōnyi tēnbā yīnā mā yū tū sū tēwō mā kēpa tī rāshīng chūp tēwā yīnā tēne tēmē rā tsāwā rā mē bā tā jīkpā rē sā tēmē yīnā hāni kēyā rē sā kēk rē sā lāyā mā rē sā kō tēnō yīnā mē rā wā sā tēmē yīnā kēyā tēmē tā kēpa rā mē bē yū chidar chūp yū chūp tū chidar yō And
it concludes, however, if the non-produced were inherently true as non-produced, it would be no different from being entirely non-existent. Therefore, how could it be fit to be created by causes? So here, if something that is not produced were inherently existent as not produced, it couldn't change. Nothing could impact it because it's independent and it's unchanging. So therefore, it would remain non-produced, meaning the result could never come about. And therefore, it is no different from something being non-existent. Sorry. Because if something is inherently not produced, it cannot be produced because it's unchanging. That's a characteristic of being inherently existent. And therefore, if something is non-produced and it was inherently non-produced, it could never change and therefore it could never become produced. That means it would stay non-produced, which means it's the same as being non-existent.
Tēsāng tāng hānsu kā rāngshīng dhūpē kiawā yamā rāngshīng dhūpā kī shē yodō nē rāngsu samlā nāla kār chā kōrō sē nē rāngshīng dhūpā lā tō kānglā yamā tō bā kōrō ngō nē yō bā gyō gyū nē rōyā mē tō kēn tēnī chīli samlām rāngshīng dhūpā lā tō tēnē samlā kō kōrō wā tā tēsāng gyū rāngshīng dhūpē gyū lā yō tō tēsāng gyū sē tē kānglā yamā tō bā kōrō ngō nē dhūp tō gyō gyū nē rōyā mē kēn gyū sē tē tēnī chī kō kōrō wā tē tēnī lām sā sam tā dī nā yī tā tē tēnī kī tā jidāng 제부 되게 규도서 맞게 바라와 규도서 맞게 바래 이네 유어균에 줘야 메팅에 맞게 받아 말아와 규도서 제부도 깨요 말때 이네 유어균에 줘야 메팅에 맞게 받아 말아와 유어줘요로와 유어줘네 제부도 끼고로와 제가 맞게 봐 규도서 제부 맞게 받이 랑신이 두바 짐바이나 유어균에 줘야 메게 그런 건데 유어균에 줘야 메팅에 나마 같이 딱 하랑 뒤에 되게 고고로와 Tene devu temero shi, tenum temeda chikbare, sao yin meba chikbare, devu kia ser yungbare, sa disigurwa.
In these 2 points, we're seeing that if a result, because we're looking here at now results, causes do produce results. If the result was inherently existent, or in the second point, the not produced were inherently existent, that would mean they would be unchanging and independent. So, and a result, if it were inherently existent, would always have been there. It couldn't be newly produced, because if it were newly produced, there would have been a process of production and therefore a process of change and a process of dependency. And then in the second illustration, or the second bullet point, if something were inherently true as non-produced, if something was non-produced and inherently existent, it too could never change, and therefore it would remain non-produced or non-existent. So when we bear in mind the meaning of inherent existence, that it is unchanging, that it exists by way of its own essence, its own nature, it's self-existent, and it's independent, so nothing impacts on it, we can see the flaws in this way of thinking. The meaning is then summarized from a quote from Nagarjuna's text, the 70 stanzas on emptiness. Because it exists, the existent is not produced. Because it does not exist, the non-existent is not produced.
여여반상 규디수 여여바자 아니 뭐 매바 서도 깨와래 라요 마 깨와 민시데 예치르 여여바 깨민데세도 제보디 랑신이 줍되바 인제 결혼 랑신이 줍바래 라기도 와서 제보디 제보 랑신이 줍바 있나 그디나 줍줍바지 깨깨바지 여여바래스 진짜 여여바 인자 아니 아주 깨셔야지 냐마 규디수 매바 서도 깨와라고 와 서도 줍바라고 와 세상 결혼한테 제보데 랑신 주반자 개인나 끼에네 여여바래 여여반자 규두스 매바직 아니 스타도 깨와래 살아야요 말해서 끼민데서 인지가 당보데.
Look in the first line. Because it exists, the existent is not produced. What this means is if something existed inherently, and here, if a result existed inherently, so because it exists, to then expand that, if a result existed inherently, then it would mean it was always, would always exist. If a result were inherently existent, it would always be present, it always would be there, which means there could not be production. Because production means that there is a process. From first a cause, being a ripening, a result follows. But if that result were inherently existent, there could not have been a preceding process of production, because that inherently existent result is unchanging and is independent of, for example, causes, the preceding causes. So an inherently existent result could not come about in dependence on causes, and it would always have had to be present.
랑신이 주바시나 매바데 랑신 주바 이바이나 자오게 때메다 저 주어 랑신 주바인자 주어줘야겠는 요 말은 주어줘야겠는 매해지레스 당보 컨디션 다가라만 주어줘야 매해지레 데네자 kon 제부 유즈 매바데 때는 매바데 찍바차 때메다 찍바레스 때메다 찍바 있나 데네 게 제부 끼그레스 끼그레스에 라요 말스 끼와 용구 말스 끼와 민세 매칠 규디 제보디 규두스 매바데 랑신 주바 인자 랑신 주바 있나 아니 매바세 때메다 찍바레스 때메다 찍바 있나 데니 기 제보 끼와 민세 제보 끼그레스 라요 말레스 끼기 말레스.
If a result that was yet to come into being, so this now, the second line in the verse is relating to the second bullet point. If a result was unproduced, so in other words, the result was still to come about, still to arise, if that unproduced result were inherently existent, this unproduced, inherently existent result would be unchanging, which means it would stay inherently unproduced, and it would be independent, which means no cause could ripen to bring the unproduced result into the state of existence. And therefore, the unproduced result would remain unproduced and be the same as being non-existent. So here that then is the two lines. The first line relates to the first bullet point, and the second line to the second bullet point.
제보 코로양 라신이 두바에는 유어 균열만 셴라 맞된 바차고래 셴레 맞된 바치데 제부기에 용바 제부기에서데 유질에 떼네 기오규래 떼네 기오고래 셴라 떼네 기오고래스 유디양 셴기레 떼네 유어 줘발레 떼네 유어 줘발레 떼네 기오고래스 제사 데네 인사 다던다라 강라야 유단 제부 간데시네 강라야 맞되바 유어 균열 줘야 메데 랑용원이 두바도 요 말레스 제가 매반장 안도를 낭도 가는 땅으로서는 유다 집어서야 파 낭도 칸라에 맞도 바랑원이 줍되겐 유어기도 줘야면 랑원이 줍되 난거레스 제가 안도를 나와나 신직 다가라 니수로 이 말레스 제가 안도 제바치도 qabla 유유와 맞도바나 아니 미국이 도움이 와 베네 조사간을 저 캄보디아전 사번 캄보디아나 지금도 와 델야 안마 사나나마 루 추루 콜롬바 차데네 보보아 차데네 마진 안지기도 와 유어드네 기기도 와 제산 규디 유어 마토바나 제부기 두 말레스 제산 제부디 규디라 마텐 바이나 제부기야요 말 제산 주 제부를 때네 기고레스 제도다 된다랑아도 구도 가르쳐서 로라 나와나시 갈라에 마토바 랑원이 두바디요 말레스 maybe 김천 보도스는 지난 규다 대버 차산 현실을 뛰네 홍도 와스 현실을 뛰네 안델라 이게 용거를 두고를 지난 현실을 뛰네 두바래 지난 현실을 뛰네 두바선 유어 두바래 강라에 유어균에 줘야 매바데 재면도 와스 지난 가서로라 낭소디 당의 니수디디 튕금도 와서 월다 뭐의 니술라 현실을 뛰네 유어친지 두부도스 낭소데라 강라에 마되바 유어균의 랑원에 두바 낭 제자 딩이 튕금이 누워서야 도스전에 나들이야 다또 된마 땡징 저와주 땡땡인 남자마 직두수 땡나기 진바 되네 땡기도와 되네 땡기도와 되네 맞된 바이나 균디 용구도와 되네 용구도와 선 도스전에 심주지다 삼다하데 맞으기 도스전에 송고어봐 제자 되네 손에 땡징 저와 중화대 하고에도 되네 간점질이야 강라에 마되바 나와나 랑원 두바 자오기 민두 선배선 삼로디 레투고 동바이도 벌로디 기투고로와
How do we relate to what we've looked at in diamond slivers in these two parts? Well, you've heard me say so many times that everything appears to consciousness as being truly existent, but nothing exists truly. So everything that appears to us appears as if it exists by way of its own essence, but doesn't exist in this way. It's rather empty of existing this way. So here we have another meditation technique to apply to come to integrate our understandings of emptiness and dependent arising at a subtler or a deeper level. Because when it's said that every object of thought appears as truly existent, so when we're thinking about a phenomenon, that phenomenon is a result, and it appears as truly existent. And if we then think about the causes of that result, those causes also appear to consciousness as truly existent. When you hear that all phenomena appear to consciousness as existing by way of their own essence, this technique of diamond slivers enables us to take that understanding to a deeper level, recognizing that what our object of thought is a result. It has come about independent on causes. And we know this from experience in our own life. We have to treat a seed, take good care of a seed, so as to get a plant. We know that this is the case. Yet, the plant appears to us, the result, the plant, appears to us as truly existent. We have to then keep reminding ourselves, it does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. Rather, it exists as a dependent arising, dependent on causes, parts, and imputation by mind. When we reflect on the causes that led to the phenomenon we're thinking about, those causes too we need to remind ourselves. They appear to us as being self-existent, but they cannot be, otherwise they could never be a cause, in that no result could possibly come from them. So here, we can look at every object from the perspective of the result, or the perspective of the cause, recognizing that it appears to us as being truly existent, but cannot exist in this way. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. Rather, the way it does exist is dependent. The result appears to us as being truly existent or independent, but it is dependent. Its cause also appears to us as being truly existent or independent, but it also is dependent. So this is how we can utilize this presentation to deepen our understanding of reality.
나 donda ningbo di nga zugi chue kan de chin na pa chen chi la due che pa lu da ba zmi yue ba de ha go ye gi donda la di ri an de ta go ye du gang la ye ma de rang mo ne zhe dong ba de ha go ye gi donda la di donda la nga zugi da rigbi nam rang sam la da na mang bo je da le ge wa ma re sa da de xian le jie na de ne yong gu re sa da ni ge le jie na de ne gyun yong gu re sa da dang gyu me ba le jie na de ne gyun gu re sa da du xie da 제자다 두진의 타실리 봐 제바제 된지게 남샤 타고야 된다를 두 제바제 안디나신 아주 귤 봐제 규기 제후되는 제베네 라신 주비 규치래 되는 제베네 견되는 연구를 해서다 다 제후 코로 라신 주바치네 한제 견되는 연구를 해서 다 가지고 리빈 남라 제바제다 망부지 두진의 제바제제 삼단의 심주체네 아주 탐에 타줘라 하고 해야 되라 간에시나 현실을 뛰는 주바 对你主部的人多，身边个对你主部，哪怕大把这么有把人多，身边个好过也一段来修。你好过用对，假如是刚来没掉上门的主部早一点，民多身边什么都好过的过了吧，累过了，让人主部东北的好过了，让人主部东北的好过用对，东北的人多好过用对，理解了，这些俺就落了呀，是刚来没的让我主部拿拿起，拿出的在哪下落下的。 너 추워지게 샤스 제가 뒤다가나 여봐 세집이 침바디 로록셰 너 주래도 와 세베 삼로치리 두고라 니니기 니던다랑아 저기다 제바로 심지제 망보 제셔야지 don다라 먼저 삼로다나 리브 제바 제상 망보 지바직 고두르 제 바시에도 don다닝보디 최내 라신 주비 동배 동방이 또 로제게 don다라 이 don다라 시고르다 태메 다줘도 디레와
The essence of this presentation that we've been looking at over these two sessions is that all phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own essence and are dependent arisings. This is despite their appearing in the opposite way, as if they are independent. So therefore, every object of thought appears to us in a way that it does not exist. We then grasp at it as existing in the way that it does not, and then due to this wrong consciousness, attachment arises, anger arises, and so forth. So we need to recognize this through investigating a wide variety of phenomena, seeing how they appear, and then investigating whether they exist in this way or not. Are they, and we can look at the first division, do they exist from itself? Do they exist from other? Do they exist from both self and other, or causelessly? And we go through this process again and again, gaining ever more familiarity, that at no point can a cause be self-existent? Likewise, in the second part, the resulting phenomenon, the result, this cannot be inherently existent either, for the reasons presented here. Because if it were inherently existent, it would always have existed. It couldn't have come about in dependence on causes. So we remind ourselves of this again and again. And as we become more familiar with this technique in meditation, so that we can run through the various steps here, the various points that we have, and we get very familiar with the meditation, then when we're out of meditation and we're feeling a bit annoyed about something, we can ask ourselves, that what I'm annoyed about, does it exist in the way that it appears? And we recognize that it does not exist in the way that it appears. So what are we annoyed about? Likewise, if we're attached, what am I attached to? It does not exist in the way that it appears. My attachment is foolish. And like this, our afflictions weaken. And our afflictions weaken in dependence on our training in meditation and our application of that out of meditation. This all means we're coming to engage with phenomena more in accordance with how they exist in reality.
야 데니게 삼로다 땡진 저와 삼다다 ran신 주비 동하디 바도 삼 야네 야도 야네 야도 이두 스타베네 데네 삼로디 코리아레 데스 교가 코르투야다 안지 ran신 주바 삼다 나 땡진 삼로 교가 삼 코르투야 데네 제 삼로디 바지 누바 처처 슉처처 줘야디 소수게다도 지네 삼로 야네 야도 땡비게 두치데 소수게 냠냠 토네다 소솔이야 데네 리기도 데네 삼로 데네 코르투 스벨레 투구로와 리고로와 데네도 제대 데네 심주제제도 안 간좀 얌차 캔자 가리나 선배기다 야지 캔자오로지 아데 가레나디 따다 가레나 선배기다 데네게 삼로라지 연구로 와데 또진 초월 막선은 믹스기 캔자 두 덴제게 삼다 라시 마두바디니 김첸디 바 제바치 삼로 초월나야 야지 캔자로지 아데 가레나 선배기 데네게 초와 연구로 와 데네지도 곧 되어서 야게 로베 따르 체고로 와 제가 데네 연자 당하나 주도 지네 삼네 야네 양도 땅발라 데네 고야기 제바체 삼다 제바체 제가 데네 사데 야게 주고로 와 제가 당한 주기 고 당보 제바치데 삼다다는 아주 당보는 빼 레라고 삼마다 당보는 차고디 삼다네 갈레카 체고로 와 데네 장한 주기도 삼다다 넘기니 빼셔야들 유메 빼셔야다 미규 추진베 빼셔야다 미규소 추진베 빼서 단 멜로나가 제신이 통위기 미기 셰바세야다 아는 아주 가른 공부나 와시에서 두 삼다들 대소 라바라바자 아주 빼 하고 레라고 쉬우체고로 와 제가 미규 추진베 와시에디 나이들 추나신는 기도 이내 추말에디 노추신는 거래 지금 외인에서 추여로 말해 외인에서 가서 님의 외다 제메기 만에 차와 디친는 거 진짜 민나요 진짜 추두 선배 삼로데 록셰리도 와 와셰들 노추신는 것도 왔으면 데네기도 라바라바 삼다네 데네기 삼다에 되는 아주 니람기 셰바나라 니람기 강바 나와다 니람이 따다랑 보시나요로와 대소데 니람 나디게 다 대소 쳐서 나와나지 따레 랑보시를 강바레 삼바나 노트 록셰리에서 두체네다 아주 두시 빼규메 빼샤다 미규출 나와서 미규샤다 안에지게 자차샤다 밀람샤다 빼도 진 빼디글 마 니엘 삼다도 삼다 데네 삼다 돈파 삼다를 롤파 rakpa tenjesidan jogida gyujebu saban tabiatese gyule tene tebada hagotuwa dene samda dene nga sade nga se karis nangu nga kala samda den majin duchin nga sibit nga zode sem sade ta sem sade karisha so suge samno sem de karish to sem de nae karis ta so sem gi kala samda sem gi mo ran shin karisha du samda de jogi duchine 다 림바르 마손에 데우스치네 삼당고레 송고로와 어디네 다 디링 저대샤다 모티시 난 지고라 예나 양직 디링 다나 지고다 상이디와 다나 지고로와
When you come to the classes and hear the teachings, you have an opportunity then to reflect on the topic matter here, to engage in reflection or meditation whilst hearing the teaching. I've been teaching this topic of dependence arising and how phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear for some years, so I'm confident you have some experience of this meditation. However, I also know that it takes quite some getting used to this way of thinking, because it's so contrary to how we generally engage our lives, even now. But the more one hears and reflects on these teachings, repeatedly over a sustained period, we will see some transformation. Right now, already, your understanding is better than it was. And if you do have a daily meditation where you include the reflections on emptiness and dependence arising, then I'm confident that the depth of your understanding will be quite different from what it was before. Here, this points to the need to repeatedly over a sustained period continue to hear these teachings and reflect on them, especially the two together, emptiness of inherent existence and dependence arising, reflecting on them, these two sequentially in the same meditation, and thereby one will develop a stronger habituation to this way of thinking. And when one can meditate quite with some ease, then take that understanding and apply it throughout your day, reminding yourself that what appears to me does not exist in the way that it appears. How does it exist then? And go through the same thought process briefly that you utilized in the morning. In this way, as the impact of one's reflections deepens, one sees one is not grasping as strongly as before, confidence will grow, and the wish to do ever more reflection, receive more teachings, will grow. And as one's mind relaxes and lightens, recognizing that phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear, so therefore to desire them or to want to repel them makes no sense. We then start to move through our everyday life experiences quite differently. And here I encourage you also to use the 8 illustrations of reflections, reflection, illusions, dreams, echo, apparitions, trick of sight, and so forth. Utilize these because they, especially between session, are easy to recall that what appears, how things appear to me, is like an illusion. It's like a dream. It does not exist in the way that it appears. I may see a reflection, and I think I'm seeing my face, but it's actually a reflection. I see a beautiful moon in a lake, but that is not the moon, of course. And then, if we think about these things these illustrations in some detail, we can then readily apply it to our everyday experiences, recognizing that sound is like an echo, in that it doesn't carry any inherent meaning. Moreover, when you engage in your meditation, another way to reflect is through the 3 spheres. Reflecting on the self, oneself, as being empty of true existence. Whatever consciousness has arisen, whether it is if one's mind is feeling afflicted, or if it's the consciousness that is doing the investigating, this too appears as inherently existent. But it doesn't exist in this way either. And if one's thinking about something, whatever that mental object is, that too is empty of inherent existence. So therefore one can use the 3 spheres, the object, the activity, and the agent, to remind ourselves of how all phenomena, without exception, are empty of inherent existence. So thank you. We'll conclude therefore tonight. If you have some questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, there'll also be the opportunity tomorrow. Thank you very much.